All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive.
It's great to be back.
And today we're going to be taking a look at,
Notes.
some English class notes.
Yeah, for a Brazilian student.
That's right. Eugenia is her name. And
Yeah,
Professor Paulo is the teacher.
that's right.
And we are going to be looking specifically at the notes from April 7th, 2025.
So that's what we're focusing on.
Yeah.
That one lesson.
That one lesson.
Right. And the notes are really pretty comprehensive. I mean, there's a lot in there.
Yeah, it looks like they cover a lot of different areas of learning English.
Yeah, pronunciation, idioms,
Vocabulary, yeah.
grammar, all that stuff.
Yeah, so let's jump into it and see if we can help Eugenia make sense of her notes.
Sounds great.
Okay, so the first section we have is vocabulary.
Right. And so these are words from the current class, as Professor Paulo wrote.
Okay,
So, yes. So let's look at some of these words, Eugenia, you were studying.
let's pick out a few that are interesting.
All right. So the first one here is tactile.
Tactile.
So what is tactile in Portuguese?
Táctil.
Tactile. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's pretty straightforward. But what kinds of things are tactile?
Well, anything that you can feel with your hands, like the texture of something,
Right.
that's tactile.
Like a fabric or...
Yeah, exactly. A fabric, a piece of wood,
Yeah.
sand.
Sandpaper, even?
Sandpaper, yeah. Sandpaper is very tactile.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, so let's see what else we've got here. Unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Sadly, or...
Yeah, infelizmente in Portuguese.
Okay, so that's another pretty simple one.
Yeah.
Pretty common word, but good to review.
Yeah, and it looks like Professor Paulo put mute and deaf together.
Cool.
So these are two words that are related to communication,
Okay.
or lack of communication.
Right.
So mute means someone who can't speak, and deaf is someone who can't hear.
And that's mudo and surdo.
Yeah. Mudo and surdo.
Okay.
All right, let's see what else we got. Wheelchair. That's a pretty common word, too.
Wheelchair is a cadeira de rodas.
Yeah, cadeira de rodas.
Right.
Very important
Very important, yes.
for people who need it.
Exactly.
Let's see what else. Oh, here's severe.
Severe.
That's a good one.
Yeah, this one can be a little tricky.
Because it has a couple different translations depending on the context.
Right.
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 So it can mean grave, like a serious situation.
Right.
Like we could say a severe economic crisis.
Exactly.
A grave crisis economica.
Yeah. And then it can also mean severo.
Which is more like strict or harsh.
Yeah.
Like we could say a severe punishment.
Right.
A punison severo.
Punison sever.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, let's see. Inclusion is a big one these days.
Huge.
Yeah, so important.
So important.
And it's a complex concept, but the word itself is pretty simple.
Yeah, inclusão in Portuguese.
That's it.
So.
It's the idea of making sure everybody's involved.
Right.
And has an opportunity to participate.
And no one is left out.
Right, exactly.
Okay. How about confusing?
Confusing is confuso.
Confuso. Something that's hard to understand.
Like learning English can be confusing sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes.
Definitely.
Let's see. And then we have controversial.
Controversial.
It's controversial.
Controversial.
Something that people disagree about.
Yeah. Strongly disagree about.
Yeah, a lot of debate.
Yeah.
Like
politics.
like politics
Yeah.
and religion and all those hot button issues.
Exactly. Those are all very controversial topics.
Okay, so moving on, we have public policy.
Public policy.
So this is kind of a more technical term.
Yeah.
But it's basically the decisions that governments make
Right.
about how to run things.
Like laws and regulations.
Yeah, and programs and all that.
Yeah.
So in Portuguese, that would be política pública.
Politica pública. Okay.
Okay, and then we have a related term, taxpayer money,
Taxpayer money.
which is dinheiro do contribuinte.
Right. So that's the money that the government collects from taxes.
Yeah.
And then uses to fund.
To fund things. Yeah.
To fund public policy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's financier.
To fund as financier.
Okay. All right, let's see. Oh, profile.
Profile.
That's a pretty common word too.
Yeah, profile.
Profile.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be like your online profile.
Social media profile.
Yeah.
Or it could be like a more general description of someone.
Like a psychological profile.
Or like a criminal profile.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are lots of different ways that word can be used.
Okay. Pandemic is something that we're all familiar with, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes.
So that's pandemia.
A worldwide disease outbreak.
Yeah.
And a related term here is stimulus check.
Oh, yes, stimulus checks. So that was something that a lot of governments sent out
during the pandemic.
to try to help people.
Yeah, to stimulate the
To stimulate the economy.
to get things going again.
And to help people.
Yeah.
So in Portuguese, I guess that would be something like cheque de estímulo.
Yeah. Something like that.
Or maybe auxilio, emergencio.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so let's see. Majority and minority. Those are two important concepts.
Yeah, and they're pretty easy to understand.
Mayoria and minoria.
That's it.
Right.
So the majority is the bigger group.
Yeah, more than half.
Right.
And the minority is the smaller group.
Less than half.
Okay.
Okay, so those are pretty straightforward.
All right, let's see. Peaceful protest.
Peaceful protest.
A form of
So this is really important. You know, when people are trying to make a change,
yeah.
you know, they can do it peacefully.
Without violence.
Yeah.
That's the key part.
Exactly. So protesto pacífico.
Protesto pacífico. Okay.
And next we have helpful.
Helpful.
Which is basically útil in Portuguese.
Right. Someone who's willing to help someone who's useful.
Yeah.
Someone who's good at something that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, nationwide, that's an easy one.
Nationwide, that means
En Portugal.
or país.
Across the whole country.
The whole country.
Yeah, so if something's happening nationwide, it's happening everywhere.
Okay. Mobilizing.
Mobilizing. So this is when people are coming together.
To take action.
Yeah.
To do something.
To make a change.
Yeah.
So in Portuguese, we could say mobilizando,
Okay.
and then a related term is rallies.
Rallies.
So this is when people gather together.
For a cause.
Yeah.
Like a political rally or a protest rally?
Yeah, exactly. Manifestações or comicios.
Okay. We have to be allowed.
Oh, that's a good one.
And then right after it, Professor Paulo wrote, to have permission.
So these two phrases mean the same thing.
Yeah.
They both mean ter permissão
Right.
in Portuguese.
But they're different ways of saying it.
Right.
To be allowed is more passive.
Like someone is giving you permission.
Right.
And to have permission is more active.
Like you've asked for permission and you've received it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's subtle difference.
But it's good to know the different ways of saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, we have Denmark.
Denmark.
That's a country in Europe.
Yeah, Dinamarca.
Damn.
So that's one of those words where the English and the Portuguese are very similar.
Yeah, it's easy to remember.
Okay. Now we have some legal terms here. Formal charge.
Formal charge.
So this is when someone is officially accused of a crime.
Right, so it's more serious than just being suspected of something.
Yeah, it means that there's enough evidence to bring charges.
Exactly, so that's accusação formal.
Okay, and then we have custody.
Custody.
So this can mean a few different things.
Yeah, it can be legal custody of a child,
Right.
or it can be being in police custody.
Right, so custodia in Portuguese.
Yeah.
And then we have defend himself.
Defend himself.
So this is what someone does when they're accused of a crime.
Right, they try to prove that they're innocent.
Right.
So that's defendercy.
Okay.
Okay, and here's a tough one. Murderer.
Murderer. That's assassino.
Yeah, a very serious word.
Very serious.
Okay, let's see, deceased.
Deceased.
So this is a more formal way of saying someone has died.
Right. Felicido.
Falecido.
Okay, and then we have repeatedly.
Repeatedly. So that means over and over again.
Repetidamente.
Yeah.
Okay. Two more words. Chemicals.
Chemicals.
Químicos.
Yeah, so these are substances that are used in science and industry.
Yeah. And then organic.
Organic.
So that's a word that's become very popular
In recent years.
in recent years.
Yeah, it usually means something that's grown or produced without using artificial chemicals.
Right.
So in Portuguese, that would be orgánico.
Orgánico.
Okay. And then the last word in this vocabulary section is environmentalism.
Environmentalism.
So this is the movement to protect the environment.
Right.
Ambientalismo.
Ambientalismo.
Okay, so that was a lot of vocabulary.
Yeah, that was a lot of
But
vocabulary.
I think we got through it all.
Yeah, we did a good job.
Um,
All right, so the next section in Eugenia's notes is about euphemisms.
okay, so euphemisms are
What are euphemisms?
they're words or phrases that we use to make something sound less harsh or unpleasant. So like instead of saying old people,
Yeah, we might say elderly.
elderly,
Yeah,
which is more polite.
right. And it also kind of emphasizes the experience and the wisdom that comes with age. So
Yeah.
it's a more respectful way of talking about older people.
Exactly.
And then another example Professor Paulo gave was instead of saying fat,
Fat.
we might say heavy,
Heavy.
which is less direct
Yeah,
and potentially less offensive.
right.
And then the last example was Instead of saying crippled,
Crippled.
we might say physically impaired.
Physically impaired.
So this is a really important one because the word crippled is considered very offensive nowadays.
Right.
And it's important to use more respectful language when we're talking about people with disabilities.
Yeah, and physically impaired is a much more neutral and accurate way to describe someone's condition.
Exactly.
So it's good to be aware of these euphemisms and to use them when appropriate.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to the next section, which is pronunciation. Okay, so this is where things get a little tricky.
A little tricky.
Because we're trying to explain the sounds of English words using Portuguese.
Yeah, which can be a challenge.
But we'll do our best.
We'll do our best.
So the first word that Professor Paulo has listed here is tactile.
Tactile.
So the pronunciation is something like tack, kick, cack. Pay attention to the stress on the first syllable.
Yeah, tax.
Almost like
And then tile.
tile.
Yeah.
So tack to tech.
Okay.
Okay. Next word is unfortunately.
Unfortunately, that's a long arm.
It is a mouthful.
Yeah.
So the pronunciation is stack. The stress is on the second syllable.
Felt.
Four. So
Yeah.
try to break it down into smaller chunks. Unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay.
Okay. Next word is wheelchair.
Wheelchair.
This one's a little easier,
This
right?
lesser, so it's like wheel and chair put together.
Exactly, with a little bit of a blend in the middle.
Yeah.
And the wh sound at the beginning is important.
Right.
It's like a puff of air.
Yeah.
Okay, next word, severe.
Severe.
This one's a little tricky.
Yeah.
Severe. The first syllable is a schwa sound.
Yeah, that's like a very short sound.
Right, and the stress is on the second syllable, ver.
Ver.
So it's Caesar bell.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then we have controversial.
Controversy. Another long.
Yeah.
So the pronunciation is the main stress is on the third syllable, ver.
Okay. Okay. Next word is paceful.
Paceful.
So it's like pace,
Right.
place, full.
Fall.
Yeah.
Pacef. Okay. Next word is murderer.
Murderer.
This own is a little dark.
Yeah.
Sinuses aren't. Okay. Next word is organic.
Organic.
So the stress is on the second syllable, gan.
Dan. Okay.
Okay, so that's a quick overview of some of the pronunciation challenges.
Yeah, and again, Eugenia, the best way to really improve your pronunciation is to listen to native speakers.
And practice.
And practice.
Yeah. Say the words out loud.
Say the words out loud, even if you feel silly.
That's the only way to get better.
That's right.
Okay.
All right, so moving on to the next section, we have idiomatic expressions.
Okay, so idiomatic expressions are...
They can be tough.
They can be tough.
Yeah, because they don't always translate literally.
Right.
So you have to kind of learn the meaning of the whole phrase.
Yeah, it's not just about the individual words.
Yeah.
It's about the meaning that they convey together.
Exactly.
Right.
So the first one that Professor Paulo has listed here is no-brainer.
No-brainer.
What does that mean?
So this means something that's really obvious, like
Yeah.
a decision that's so easy to make.
That you don't even have to think about it.
Right, it's like a barbada
A barretta.
yeah. in Portuguese.
Oh.
Or you could say it's obvio.
Obvio. Yep.
Okay. And then Professor Paulo gave an example. Choosing the discounted smartphone was a no-brainer because the price was unbeatable.
Right.
So that's a perfect example of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, if the price is unbeatable, you don't really have to think about it.
Right.
You just buy it.
You buy the phone.
You buy the phone.
Okay. Next expression is to run for office.
To run for office.
So this means to be a candidate in an election.
Right, so to try to get elected to a political position.
Yeah, so the example Professor Paulo gave is, after years of community work, she decided to run for office in the local council elections.
Right.
So that means she's going to try to get elected to the local council.
And in Portuguese, we could say candidatar-se.
Yeah, candidatar-se cargo politico.
Okay.
Okay, next expression is, there you go.
There you go.
This is a very versatile expression.
Yeah, it can mean a lot of different things.
Depending on the context.
Right.
So it can be used to confirm that something has been done correctly.
Like if someone asks you to pass them the salt, and you pass them the salt, you could say, there you go.
Right.
Or it could be used to express satisfaction or approval.
Like if someone shows you something they've done and you're impressed, you could say, there you go.
Yeah, or it could be used to hand something to someone.
Right. Like if you're giving someone their change at the store, you could say, there you go.
Yeah. So it's a very useful expression.
And Professor Paulo gave an example. After finally solving the puzzle, His friends smiled and said, "There you go."
Right.
So in that context, it's expressing satisfaction.
Yeah, like, you got it, or good job.
Right.
So in Portuguese, we could say ahí está,
Ahí está. Yeah.
or pronto.
Pronto.
Yeah. Okay, next expression is, it's none of my business.
It's none of my business.
This is a good one to know.
Yeah, it's a way of saying that you don't want to get involved in something.
Right, that it's not your problem.
Or that it's not your place to comment.
Exactly.
So the example Professor Pella gave is, I overheard their argument, but it's none of my business, so I stayed silent.
Right. So in that situation, the speaker is choosing not to get involved.
Yeah.
Even though they know what's going on.
Right. And in Portuguese, we could say, no é da minha conta.
Yeah, no é da minha conta, or no era problema meu.
Okay.
Okay, next expression is cut from the same cloth.
Cut from the same cloth.
This is a more figurative expression.
Yeah, it's not literal.
It means that two people are very similar.
Right. They have the same qualities.
Or the same values.
Yeah.
So the example Professor Paulo gave is, both coworkers are exceptionally dedicated and honest, truly cut from the same cloth.
Right.
So these two coworkers are very similar in terms of their work ethic and their character.
Yeah, and in Portuguese, we could say farinha do mesmo saco.
Farinha do mesmo saco, yeah.
Or tal pe tal filho.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Okay. Next expression is due process of law.
Due process of law.
So this is a very important legal concept.
Yeah, it's the principle that everyone is entitled to fair treatment under the law.
Right. So it means that everyone has the right to a fair trial and to be treated equally.
Yeah.
Regardless of their race, religion, or social status.
Exactly. So in Portuguese, we could say devido processo legal.
Devido processo legal.
Okay. And Professor Paula gave an example. Despite the evidence, the suspect was granted due process of law, a fair trial before judgment.
Right. So even though there was evidence against the suspect, he was still given a fair trial.
Yeah.
Because that's what due process of law requires.
Okay.
Okay. And then the last idiomatic expression is, it pisses me off.
It pisses me off.
So this is a very informal and strong way of saying that something makes you angry.
Yeah.
So the example Professor Paula gave is, it really pisses me off when people leave their trash behind in the park.
Right.
So the speaker is very annoyed by people who litter.
Yeah. And in Portuguese, we can say, isso me irrita muito.
Yeah. Isso me irrita muito, or isso me deixa furioso.
Okay.
Okay, so those are some useful idiomatic expressions.
Yeah. And again, Eugenia, these are just a few examples.
There are many, many more.
So keep studying and keep practicing.
And don't be afraid to use them in your own conversations.
That's right. The more you use them, the more natural they'll become.
Exactly.
All right. So the last section in Eugenia's notes is about grammar.
Okay, so this section focuses on the suffix, suffness,
Yeah.
and how it's used to form nouns.
From adjectives.
Yeah.
So Professor Paul gave a bunch of examples.
Yeah, he did.
So let's go through them.
Okay, so the first example is aware,
Aware.
which is an adjective.
And then when we add seffiness to the end, we get awareness.
Awareness, which is a noun.
Right. And it means the state of being aware.
Exactly. So it's like consciencia in Portuguese.
Consciencia. Okay.
Okay, next example is careless,
Careless.
which means not careful.
And when we add sefness, we get carelessness.
Carelessness, which means lack of care.
Right. And that's descuido in Portuguese.
Descuido. Okay.
Okay. Next example is homeless,
Homeless.
which means without a home. And when we add fittiness, we get homelessness.
Homelessness, which means the state of being homeless.
Right. And that's a really serious problem in many parts of the world.
Unfortunately, yeah.
So in Portuguese, we could say situação de rua or condição de sem teto.
Situação de rua or condição de sem teto.
Okay. Okay. Next example is friendly,
Friendly.
which means kind and pleasant. And when we add compness, we get friendliness.
Friendliness, which means the quality of being friendly.
Right. And that's simpatia or amabilidade in Portuguese.
Simpatia or amabilidad. Okay.
Okay. Next example is selfish,
Selfish.
which means thinking only of yourself. And when we add egoness, we get selfishness.
Selfishness, which means the quality of being selfish.
Right. And that's egoismo in Portuguese.
Egoismo.
Okay.
Nice.
And then the last example is weak,
Weak.
which means not strong. And when we add agoness, we get weakness.
Weakness, which means lack of strength.
Right. And that's fraqueza in Portuguese.
Fraqueza. Okay.
So as you can see, Eugenia, the suffix haginess is a very useful way to form nouns from adjectives.
Yeah, it's a common pattern.
And it can really help you to expand your vocabulary.
Absolutely.
And Professor Paulo also pointed out that there are some spelling rules to keep in mind when you're adding heckness
Right.
So if the adjective ends in hey,
Like happy or
Makes it-
lazy.
you usually change the Y to an I before adding heckness.
Right. So happy becomes happiness and lazy becomes laziness.
But there are some
It's
exceptions.
busy.
Busy becomes business.
Yeah, so you have to be careful
You have to be careful.
and pay attention to the spelling.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Professor Pollard also mentioned that some adjectives that end in heckus,
Like curious or generous.
they usually form nouns with the suffix hecti instead of hecknessness.
Right. So curious becomes curiosity and generous becomes generosity.
So there are some patterns to learn.
Yeah, but with practice, it'll become second nature.
That's right.
Okay.
So, Eugenia, we've come to the end of our deep dive into your England class notes.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground today.
Wow.
We've looked at vocabulary pronunciation, idiomatic expressions, and grammar.
And hopefully this has helped you to make sense of your notes.
Yeah, and to feel more confident about your English skills.
So keep studying and keep practicing, and you'll be fluent in no time.
Absolutely.
And remember, Eugenia.
Don't just learn the language.
Yeah.
Live
Wow.
it.
That's right.
Embrace it.
Yeah, make it your own.
Because it's not just about the words.
Yeah.
It's about communication.
It's about connecting with people.
and expressing yourself.
Exactly.
So go out there and communicate.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
That's how you learn.
That's how you learn.
Okay.
All right, Eugenia, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into your English class notes.
And we hope to see you back here again soon for another one.
That's right. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.